Poor rancher adopted the most useless horse at auction. The animal made him rich. The bell clangs in a dusty town square. A broken rancher, pockets nearly empty, lifts his hand for a sway-backed, half-blind horse no one else will touch. Laughter ripples through the crowd, worthless. They jeered Dot, but when the horse follows his little girl like it can read her heart, something stirs. This beast, thrown aside by men, may not be useless after all. Then the church bell tolls again, dark news. A railroad agent arrives with papers to take the ranch, unless proof of prosperity is shown. And the only hope rests on that crooked horse. Soon the useless animal is uncovering secrets of the land no man could find, turning jeers into whispers. Yet when forged deeds and betrayal threaten everything, the question remains. Was this horse sent to save a broken family? Or will the rancher lose it all before the truth is revealed? Comment below and tell me where in the world you're joining from. And if this story made you pause for a moment, hit that subscribe button for more. The morning sun casts long shadows across Silver Creek stockyards, painting everything in harsh yellow light. Dust hung in the air like a thin veil, making the whole scene look washed out and tired. Eli Branson clutched $11 in his worn leather wallet, running his calloused thumb over the crumpled bills. Each one represented hours of fence mending and cattle tending for neighbors who could spare the work. He needed a good plow horse, strong and steady. The thought of facing another season without proper help made his shoulders ache. Beside him, his daughter Clara stood quiet but alert, her small hand wrapped in the loose fabric of his coat sleeve. The morning chill had put roses in her cheeks, making her look even younger than her 11 years. First lot. The auctioneer bellowed from his perch on a wooden platform. His voice carried across the yard, drawing clusters of ranchers and farmers closer. Fine Morgan gelding, 8 years old, sound and wind and... Eli watched the bidding climb far beyond his means. He kept his hands firmly at his sides as the horse was led away by its new owner. 2 more animals went the same way, good stock, but at prices that might as well have been the moon for all he could reach them. Then came a commotion from the holding pens. 2-yard hands dragged forward a sorry sight of a horse. More bones than flesh, with a distinctive sway to its back that spoke of hard years. One of its eyes was clouded white, and its walk showed a pronounced limp. Patches of darker hair broke up its dusty brown coat like islands in a pale sea. Laughter rippled to the crowd. Who would waste feet on that broken-down nag? Someone called out. Others joined in with their own jests, each one sharper than the last. Clara's grip tightened on Eli's sleeve. "Pa," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the crowd's mockery. "Pa, look at his eyes. He ain't mean he's scared." Eli glanced down at his daughter, then back at the horse. Past the obvious defects, he saw what Clara meant. The animal's good eye showed intelligence, and despite its clear fear, it wasn't fighting the handlers. It moved with a strange dignity, like it was trying to preserve what pride it had left. The auctioneer cleared his throat. "Well, folks, let's start the bidding at $1?" His tone made it clear he expected no takers. The yard boss, a burly man with sun-reddened face, stepped forward with a whip in his hand. "Ain't worth the bullet to put it down," he growled. Raising the whip, Eli's arm shot up before his mind could catch up to what he was doing. "$1, he called out, his voice rough with disuse. The silence that followed felt heavy as iron. Then someone in the back broke it with a harsh laugh. "Sold for $1 and a sorrow." The words drew scattered chuckles from the crowd. The auctioneer's gavel fell with a sharp crack. "Sold to Branson." "Next lot." Eli moved forward to claim his purchase, aware of the pitying looks and head shaking that followed him. The yard hands practically threw the lead rope at him, clearly glad to be rid of their charge. Up close, the horse looked even worse. Ribs showing clear as barrel staves, coat dull with neglect. That crooked gait more pronounced. Clara followed as Eli led their new acquisition through Silver Creek's main street. The morning had warmed some, but the wind still cut sharp around corners. They passed the whitewashed one-room church, its steeple reaching up like a finger pointing to heaven. Mrs. Wilcox stood in the doorway of her recorder's office, her expression unreadable as she watched them pass. The walk home took longer than usual, accounting for the horses' halting pace. By the time they reached their ranch house, the sun hung low on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The house itself leaned slightly to one side. As if tired of fighting the constant wind, "I'm a fool," Eli muttered, more to himself than anyone else. He secured the horse in their small stable with rope that had seen better days, just like everything else they owned. "I'll warm up the cornbread." "Pa," Clara said, heading for the house. She returned a few minutes later with several pieces wrapped in a clean cloth. While Eli checked the horse's hooves for stones, Clara stood by the stall door. The horse stretched its neck toward her, nostrils flaring gently as it caught the scent of cornbread. With careful movements, it lowered its head and brushed its muzzle against her palm, as if offering an apology for its sorry state. The gesture caught Eli off guard. Most horses, this poorly treated, turned mean, yet this one showed a gentleness he hadn't expected. He found himself offering up a quiet prayer as he worked. "Lord, if you can find use in the useless, now would be a fine time to show it." The lamp in the kitchen window flickered, its light a warm beacon in the gathering dusk. From beyond the stand of cottonwoods that marked their property line, coyotes began their evening chorus of yips and howls. Eli thought about tomorrow's work. More fence sections needed repair, and he wasn't sure how much help this broken-down horse would be. Clara had taken to scratching behind the horse's ears, earning a contented sigh from the animal. "He needs a name, Pa," she said. Eli looked at the mottled coat. The way the darker spots stood out against the lighter base. "Reckon we might as well call him Patch," he said. "Patch," Clara repeated, trying out the name. The horse's good ear swiveled toward her voice. "I think he likes it," watching them together. Eli felt something shift in his chest. Not hope exactly, not yet, but maybe the soil where hope might take root. He'd bought a broken horse with his last dollars, and tomorrow's troubles still loomed large as mountains. But for now, in the quiet of evening with his daughter's smile bright as the last ray of sun, he let himself believe that maybe the Lord really did work in mysterious ways. The stable smelled of old hay and fresh-turned earth. Patch shifted in his stall, settling in for the night. His movements, though awkward, held a certain care, as if he was trying to make the best of his new home. Eli checked the rope one last time, his hands moving through the familiar motions of securing a knot. "Time for supper, Clara," he said finally. "That cornbread won't eat itself." Clara gave Patch one last pat before following her father to the house. Behind them, the horse watched with his good eye, standing quiet in his stall like he'd been there all along. Like maybe this was where he'd been meant to end up. Eli paused at the stable door, looking back at their dollar's worth of horse. In the deepening shadows, Patch's broken-down figure seemed less pitiful somehow. Maybe it was the way he held his head, or how his good eye reflected the last light of day. But there was something there, something that made Eli think of his own story, of all the times he'd felt useless and found purpose again. Through grace he hadn't earned. The floorboards creaked softly as Clara eased out of bed before her first light. Her tick mattress rustled as she reached for the piece of cornbread she'd saved from supper, wrapping it carefully in her apron pocket. Through the window, the sky was still dark as coal ink, with just a hint of gray touching the eastern horizon. Outside, the morning air bit sharp and clean against her cheeks. Dew had settled heavy on the sparse grass, dampening the hem of her calico dress as she made her way to the stable. The worn planks of the door felt rough beneath her fingers as she eased it open, trying not to wake her father. Patch's good eye caught what little light filtered through the cracks in the stable wall. He lifted his head at her approach, ears pricked forward with interest. Clara held her breath, uncertain how the horse would react. But Patch merely watched her with that same gentle attention he'd shown the evening before. "Morning?" she whispered, holding out her hand palm up, the way her father had taught her with new horses. Patch stretched his neck forward, his whiskers tickling her skin as he sniffed her palm. When she took a step backward, he followed without any lead rope, his hooves placing carefully in the straw as if he was counting his steps. Clara smiled, warmth spreading through her chest. She eased the stable door wider and stepped out into the yard. Patch followed like a shadow, matching her pace. When she stopped to look at a meadowlark perched on the fence post, he stopped too, standing quiet as a statue beside her dot through the kitchen window. Lamplight flickered to life. Clara knew her father would be starting the coffee soon. She led Patch around the yard, testing how well he'd follow. Each time she paused, he did too, as natural as breathing. It was almost like he could read her mind. The kitchen door creaked open, and her father stepped out onto the porch, coffee cup steaming in his weathered hands. His brow furrowed as he watched them. But Clara saw more worry than anger in his expression. "He's real gentle, Pa," she called, softly. "Want to see?" Eli set his cup on the porch rail and stepped down into the yard. His boots left dark prints in the wet grass as he approached. Patch's ears swiveled to track him, but the horse didn't shy away. "Let's see his manners, then," Eli said, reaching for the curry comb hung by the stable door. He approached Patch's left side, speaking low and easy. "Stand now, friend." Patch remained still as a post while Eli ran the comb over his dusty coat. The horse's muscles twitched at first contact, but he didn't move his feet. When Eli clucked his tongue and applied gentle pressure to the horse's shoulder, Patch stepped sideways. A bit awkward on his stiff legs, but willing to try. Clara fetched water from the pump for Patch's bucket. The horse waited patiently, then stepped neatly aside when she needed to work the handle, as if he'd lived in their yard all his life. After a breakfast of cornmeal mush and the last of yesterday's coffee, Eli hitched their old mule, Jenny, to the wood sledge. They needed to drag fallen cottonwood branches from the creek bottom for winter firewood. Without being asked, Patch followed along behind as they made their way down the hill. The morning warmed quickly as they worked. Eli and Clara loaded branches while Jenny stood patient in the traces. Patch picked his way carefully around the sagebrush, never wandering far, but keeping clear of the sledge's path. His manner was so different from the trembling, head-shy creature they'd brought home yesterday that Clara had to hide her smile behind her hand. The sun had climbed past noon when trouble struck. A dust devil whirled up sudden from behind a stand of cottonwoods, spinning dead leaves and twigs in its funnel. Jenny's eyes went wide with fear. Before Eli could grab her head, she lunged forward, jerking the loaded sledge. Clara, who had been gathering kindling nearby, lost her footing as she tried to dodge. She stumbled, falling toward Jenny's churning hooves. Her heart leaped into her throat as she saw the mule's iron-shod feet flashing above her dot, but then something solid pressed against her side. Patch had positioned himself between Clara and the panicked mule, using his body like a shield. He stood steady despite Jenny's thrashing, giving Eli the precious seconds he needed to grab the trace chains and bring the mule under control. When the dust settled, Clara found herself shaking. Eli dropped to his knees beside her, rough hands checking for injuries. Finding none, he pulled her close, his arms trembling almost as much as she was. "Thank the Lord," he whispered into her hair. "And thank you, old boy," he added, looking up at Patch, who still stood guard nearby. The rest of the afternoon passed quietly. They worked more carefully now, with Eli keeping a firmer hand on Jenny's lead. By the time they headed home, the sun was sinking toward the western hills, painting the sky in sheets of purple and gold. Clara stirred the pot of pinto beans she'd set to simmer that morning while her father cut fresh slices of cornbread. The familiar smells filled their small kitchen as they settled at the table for supper, instead of their usual tired silence. Tonight they talked about names for their new horse. "He needs something fitting," Eli said, breaking his cornbread into his bowl of beans. "Something that speaks to his character." Clara pushed her spoon through her beans, thinking hard. "What about Patch?" She suggested finally, "Like how the Lord patches up what's broken and makes it useful again." Eli paused with his spoon halfway to his mouth. A slow smile spread across his face, softening the worry lines around his eyes. "Patch," he repeated softly. "Yes, that'll do just fine." After the dishes were dried and put away, Eli disappeared into the stable. Clara watched through the window as he carefully wired a small wooden cross above Patch's stall. The lamplight caught the silver in her father's hair as he stepped back to check his work that night, settled deep around their small ranch house. The moon rose full and bright, casting long shadows across the yard. From somewhere in the darkness came the yipping of coyotes, closer than usual. Clara pressed her face to the window glass, watching Patch in his stall. The horse stood calm and alert, ears pointed forward, showing none of the panic most horses displayed when predators drew near. Eli joined her at the window, resting his calloused hand on her shoulder. "Reckon we'll try him with some light work tomorrow," he said quietly. "See what other surprises the Lord has in store for us." Clara leaned against her father's side, breathing in the familiar sense of leather and coffee that clung to his shirt. In the stable, Patch shifted slightly, his good eye catching the moonlight like a star. The coyotes called again, but Clara felt no fear. In the space of one day, their broken family seemed a little less broken. Patched together by an unlikely blessing in the form of a cast-off horse, the sun was just peeking over the eastern hills when Eli hitched their old mule to the buckboard wagon. Morning dew sparkled on the sparse grass, and a cool breeze carried the scent of sage across the yard. Clara sat perched on the wagon seat, her slate blue dress freshly pressed despite its patches, her dark hair neatly braided. "Hold tight now," Eli said, climbing up beside her. The wagon wheels creaked as they set out, following the rutted track toward Silver Creek. Behind them, Patch watched from his makeshift corral, his good eye following their departure. The 7-mile journey into town took nearly 2 hours, the mule plodding steadily through the morning heat. Clara kept a careful eye out for prairie flowers, marking their locations in her memory for future gathering. Eli's thoughts wandered to his depleted money pouch and the list of supplies they desperately needed dot as they approached Silver Creek. The usual morning quiet was replaced by an unusual bustle. Wagons lined the street, and clusters of people gathered on wooden sidewalks, their voices carrying notes of worry. Outside the general store, Mrs. Peterson wrung her hands while talking to the blacksmith. Something stirred up the town proper, Eli muttered. Pulling the wagon to a stop near Watson's general store, the bell above the door chimed as they entered, and Mr. Watson's weathered face greeted them from behind the counter. "Morning, Branson," the shopkeeper said, his usual cheerful tone subdued. "Reckon you'll be wanting to head over to the meeting hall come noon. Railroad men are posting some kind of notice." Eli's stomach tightened. "Railroad men? Silver and Pacific outfit? Been measuring and marking all morning." Watson shook his head. Never seen such fine suits in Silver Creek before. While Eli counted out precious coins for nails and salt, Clara studied the candy jars on the high shelf, though she knew better than to ask. The store's usual morning peace was broken by the constant ring of the doorbell as neighbors came and went, each carrying similar worried expressions. At noon, the church bell rang out across town. Eli and Clara joined the stream of people heading toward the white-painted building that served as both church and meeting hall. Inside, the familiar pine pews were filled with ranchers, shopkeepers, and homesteaders. The air was thick with anxiety and the smell of dust-covered boots. A man in a crisp black suit stood at the pulpit, his watch chain glinting in the sunlight that streamed through the windows. Pike Mallory, the railroad foreman, had a smile that never reached his eyes as he unrolled a large document. "Good people of Silver Creek," Mallory began, his voice smooth as creek stones. "The Silver and Pacific Railroad brings progress and prosperity to all it touches." He paused, scanning the crowd. "In accordance with territorial statutes, all lands within 3 miles of the planned railway line must demonstrate economic productivity within 30 days. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Mallory's smile tightened as he continued. "Those unable to prove sufficient production will have their lands requisitioned for railway benefit. With appropriate compensation, of course." Eli's hands clenched in his lap. He did mental calculations: 12 head of cattle, broken fences that let coyotes pick off calves, a well running low in the summer heat. Clara's small hand slipped into his. Warm and reassuring, Reverend Abel Garner stood up from his front row seat, his voice steady. "Brother Mallory, many here are still recovering from last year's drought. Surely the Lord's grace allows for mercy in such matters." "The Lord helps those who help themselves, Reverend," Mallory replied smoothly. "We merely require proof that the land is being used productively." "Surely good Christians such as yourselves understand the value of industry." The meeting dissolved into worried discussions as Mallory tacked the notice to the church door. Eli stood quietly, watching his neighbors gathered in small groups. Their voices a mix of fear and anger. Reverend Garner made his way through the crowd to Eli's side. "Brother Branson," he said softly, "the Lord often works through the hands of neighbors. Don't be too proud to accept help in these trying times." Before Eli could respond, Miss Edith Shaw, the schoolmarm, approached Clara with a gentle smile. Her blue calico dress was as neat as her penmanship, and her eyes sparkled with purpose. "Clara," she said, "have you heard about the county fair? It's coming up in 2 weeks, and this year they've added something special." She pulled a printed notice from her reticule. "An endurance ride with a $50 purse for the winner." Clara's eyes widened. $50? She whispered, looking up at her father. Miss Shaw nodded. "It's quite a challenge. 15 miles through marked territory, testing both rider and horse. But I've seen how that new horse of yours minds you, Clara." Eli frowned. "Patch ain't exactly built for racing, Miss Shaw. It's not about speed, Mr. Branson," she explained. "It's about steadiness and completing the course. That $50 might help with whatever improvements the railroad requires." The ride home was quieter than the morning journey. The sun hung low over the western hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Eli's mind churned with worries and half-formed plans. The ranch had been in the Branson family for 2 generations, its boundaries marked as much by memories as by fence posts as they pulled up to the ranch house. The day's last light caught Patch's coat, making him look almost golden. The horse nickered softly at the return, and Clara immediately went to him with their few table scraps. "Might as well see what he can do," Eli muttered. More to himself than Clara, he retrieved their old harness and approached Patch carefully. The horse stood quietly as Eli fitted the worn leather straps. His good eye watching, with what seemed like understanding. Eli attached a light drag, just a few fence posts bound together. "Get up there," he said softly, and Patch leaned into the harness. His movements were awkward, his gait still uneven, but there was no resistance, no fighting against the pull. The horse worked until the light faded completely, dragging the posts back and forth across the yard. His willingness touched something in Eli's heart, reminding him of his own father's words. "It ain't always the strongest that gets the job done. Sometimes it's the one that just won't quit." Later, over a supper of beans and the last of the cornbread, Eli studied the railroad notice by lamplight. Clara sat across from him, her young face serious in the flickering light. "We'll prove it," she said firmly. "We'll show them the ranch is productive." Eli looked at his daughter, so much like her mother in that determined set of her jaw. Then he glanced out the window toward the stable where Patch rested. 3 things needed fixing: fences to protect the herd, a deeper well for summer water, and new seed for winter wheat. The $50 purse wouldn't cover it all, but it might be enough to show they weren't giving up. "Reckon we will," he said finally, folding the notice carefully. "Reckon we'll try our best." Through the open window, a coyote's call echoed across the darkened ranch, and from the stable came Patch's steady, watchful silence. The first rays of sunlight painted the eastern sky in gentle pinks and golds as Eli Branson worked his way along the north fence line. His calloused hands moved with practiced efficiency, stringing fresh wire between weathered posts. The morning air held a crisp bite, and dew dampened his boots as he trudged through the sparse grass. Clara had insisted on joining him, carrying spare wire clips in her apron pockets. She watched her father work, making careful notes in her little notebook about how he twisted the wire just so. The quiet morning peace was broken by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. A cloud of dust announced the arrival of their neighbor, Dora Pike, her horse lathered and breathing hard. Her usually neat gray hair had come loose from its bun, and worry creased her weathered face. "Eli, thank the Lord you're out here," she called, reining her horse to a stop. "2 of my calves slipped down the wash during the night. Been searching since dawn, but there's no sign." Her voice trembled with barely contained panic. Eli straightened slowly, working the kinks from his back. The fence line stretched before him, demanding attention. Every hour spent away meant falling further behind on the railway company's deadline. Mrs. Pike, I'm mighty sorry, but I've got to, he began. Patch can help. Clara interrupted, her eyes bright with certainty. He's got good eyes for finding things. Pa, you've seen how he is. Eli glanced between his daughter's hopeful face and Dora's desperate one. The old rancher's code tugged at his conscience. Neighbors help neighbors out here, no questions asked. Still, those fence posts wouldn't set themselves. Please, Dora added softly. They're all I've got left from last year's crop. Eli sighed, setting down his wire cutters. All right, let me get Patch saddled up. Back at the barn, Eli fitted an old blanket across Patch's back, securing it with a worn hackamore he'd traded for last month. The horse stood quietly, head lowered. As if understanding the urgency of their task, they set out with Dora leading the way, following the wash where she'd last seen the calves. The terrain grew rougher as they approached the shale slopes. Patch balked at first, eyeing the steep incline with his good eye. Easy now, Eli murmured, giving the horse his head. To his surprise, Patch lowered his nose to the ground, nostrils flaring. The horse moved forward deliberately, following something only he could sense. Clara pointed excitedly. Look, Pa, he's tracking the dust trail. Sure enough, Patch was following a barely visible line of disturbed earth, weaving between patches of greasewood. The horse's ears swiveled forward, and he angled suddenly toward a deep arroyo cut into the landscape. Distant bawling reached there. Ears, the unmistakable cry of young cattle in distress. They found the calves trapped behind a thick mass of tumbleweeds, unable to climb back up the steep bank. Hold steady now, Eli told Patch, dismounting carefully. The horse planted his feet firmly, providing an anchor as Eli worked his way down the slope. With his pocket knife, he cut away the thorny barrier, allowing the calves to scramble free. Dora's eyes shone with tears of relief as she counted her recovered stock. I don't know how to thank you, proper, she said, reaching into her apron pocket. Please, take this $1. It's not much, but that's not necessary. Eli started to protest, but Dora pressed the coin into his hand. I insist. And I'll make sure folks know about your horse's gift with tracking. There's always someone looking for lost stock around here. The sun was sinking toward the horizon by the time they'd made it back to their own ranch. Eli's shoulders sagged as he caught sight of the south fence line, still lying broken and useless. Yet something had shifted in his chest, a small spark of hope where, before there had been only worry, inside their snug kitchen, Clara stirred a pot of rabbit stew while Eli soaked his tired feet. The lamp cast warm shadows on the worn plank walls as they ate their simple supper. Pa, Clara said carefully, setting down her spoon. I'd been thinking about the county fair's endurance race. Eli looked up, waiting. Patch proved today he's steady and smart. If we trained him careful, just easy runs at sunrise and sunset so he don't tire, we might have a chance at placing. She pulled out her notebook, showing him the careful figures she'd worked out. Even third place would buy enough posts to finish the south fence. Eli studied his daughter's neat calculations. Considering, the horse had shown more promise today than he'd expected, and they needed every chance they could get to meet the railway company's deadline. It'll take work, he said slowly. Gentle conditioning, like you said. Short loops at first light and dusk, so we don't wear him down. He reached for his own notebook, marking out tomorrow's schedule. And we'll mend that south fence till noon, then start Patch's first time trot. Clara beamed, hope shining in her eyes. You really think we can do it? Eli reached across the table to squeeze her hand. Reckon we've got to try. The good Lord sent us that horse for a reason. Maybe this is part of it. Later that night, as Eli checked on Patch one last time, the horse nickered softly in greeting. In the quiet darkness, Eli found himself whispering a prayer of thanks for the day's small mercies. A neighbor helped, $1 earned, and most precious of all, a glimmer of hope for their future. The moon cast silver shadows through the barn slats as Eli latched the stall door. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, he had a plan. Fence mending till noon, then Patch's first training session. One step at a time, they'd work toward saving their home dot as he walked back to the house. Coyotes called in the distance. But For the first time in weeks, their haunting songs didn't sound quite so mournful. Perhaps they too were singing of hope and unexpected blessings, found in the most unlikely places. Clara's lamp still burned in her window, and Eli knew she'd be making more notes in her careful hand, planning out Patch's training schedule. His heart swelled with love for his daughter's determination. Between her faith and Patch's hidden talents, maybe they stood a chance after all. Morning sun painted long shadows across the south pasture as Eli worked the fence line. His calloused hands gripped the wire, testing each post's strength. The old wood had weathered too many seasons, and several posts wobbled loose in the dry earth. He dug deeper holes, tamping fresh dirt around the bases while keeping one eye on the climbing sundial. Clara brought him water in a tin cup, her braids swinging as she walked. It's nearly noon. Time for Patch's training soon. Eli wiped his brow with a dusty sleeve. Reckon you're right, daughter. Let me finish this last section. His stomach growled, reminding him they'd need to eat first. Back at the house, they shared cold biscuits left from breakfast. Clara had wrapped them in a clean cloth to keep the dust off. The simple meal filled their bellies well enough, though Eli wished he could provide better. He watched Clara brush crumbs from her apron, her eyes bright with excitement about starting their structured training. Miss Shaw said we could borrow her pocket watch, Clara announced, pulling the silver timepiece from her pocket. The chain gleamed as she held it carefully. She showed me how to read the minute hand proper. Eli nodded, grateful for the schoolmarm's kindness. That'll help us keep honest time. We'll start slow and steady. No sense in wearing Patch down first day out. They found Patch dozing in the shade of the barn. The horse lifted his head at their approach, nickering softly. Clara scratched his forelock while Eli checked the girth on their old saddle. 1 mile walking first, Eli decided, helping Clara mount. He would lead on foot, keeping careful watch on both horse and rider. Then we'll try a half-mile trot if he's willing. The autumn air held just enough bite to make good training weather. Patch's hooves kicked up small dust clouds as they followed the fence line. Clara held Miss Shaw's watch, calling out times in her clear voice. The horse moved with careful steps, compensating for his weak eye, but maintaining a steady pace. After the walking mile, Eli checked Patch's breathing. Finding it even, he nodded. All right, we'll try that trot now. Ready? Clara gathered the reins, sitting deeper in the saddle, as Eli had taught her. At his click, Patch moved into a smooth trot. His gait remained somewhat crooked, but he kept his rhythm well enough. When they finished, Eli examined Patch's shoes. The metal was worn thin, but seated evenly. No signs of stress showed in the legs or hooves. Still, he wished he knew more about proper care for a racing mount. The answer to his concerns arrived with the evening. A wagon rattled up their rutted drive, driven by a Navajo man Eli recognized from town. Ben Nez pulled his team to a halt, raising a hand in greeting. Evening, Ben called. Saw you working that horse earlier. Thought I might stop. Trade some work if you're willing. Eli approached the wagon, noting the blacksmith's tools in back. Much obliged for the offer. What kind of trade did you have in mind? Ben stepped down, moving with the easy grace of someone used to handling horses. I'm heading north, looking for a safe place to camp tonight. Offer my skills in return for your hospitality. Clara had edged closer, watching with interest as Ben walked to Patch's stall. The blacksmith ran experienced hands down the horse's legs, checking each hoof with care. Old injuries here, Ben noted, touching a scarred shoulder. But good bone structure underneath. Mind if I check these shoes? Please do, Eli said. He watched as Ben lifted each hoof, examining the wear patterns. This one's loose, Ben showed them, pointing to the near fore. I can reset it, show you both some care tricks too. While Ben worked at his portable forge, the smell of hot metal filled the evening air. He explained each step to Clara, who watched with rapt attention. The new nails went in clean, and Ben showed them how to pack the frog, the V-shaped pad of the hoof, with fresh moss. Prevents thrush, he explained. Keep it clean and dry. My grandmother taught me about horse care when I was young. She knew the old ways. Eli nodded. Would you join us for coffee? Least we can do. Coffee would be welcome, Ben agreed. He declined the whiskey Eli offered, accepting a tin cup of the strong brew instead. As darkness gathered, they sat on the porch. Ben spoke of his grandmother's teachings about reading wind patterns to find water, knowledge passed down through generations. Clara leaned forward, absorbing every word. Wind changes direction near hidden springs, Ben explained. Watch the grass, too. It knows where water sleeps beneath the ground. The conversation ended naturally as night fell fully. Ben made his camp near the cottonwoods, building 2 small fires. Keeps coyotes respectful, he explained. The evening's chorus of yips stayed distant, proving his words true. Inside the house, Eli found a scrap of ledger paper. By lamplight, he carefully recorded their training distances and times. Clara watched over his shoulder, stifling a yawn. We'll add more miles slow and careful, Eli promised. No sense rushing and hurting him. Yes, Pa. Clara hugged him before heading toward bed. Patch did real good today. That he did, Eli agreed. He heard the horse whicker once from the barn. Then quiet settled over the ranch. The lantern sputtered, running low on oil. Eli closed his ledger, thinking of the day's unexpected blessings. Ben's help had given them knowledge they sorely needed. Perhaps other help would come as they worked toward their goal. As he blew out the lamp, Eli felt more settled than he had in days. They would train steadily, showing mercy to their unexpected gift of a horse. Whether they won or lost the race, they would do it with dignity and care. Through the window, he could see Ben's twin fires glowing steady in the dark. The gesture of protection from a passing stranger reminded him that even on the frontier, God's grace could arrive in unexpected ways. He lay down on his bed, sleep coming easier than usual despite the weight of their challenges. The next 2 days settled into a careful pattern at the Branson Ranch. Each morning, Eli rose before dawn, his joints creaking as he pulled on his boots. Clara was always close behind, her small feet padding across the wooden floor to help with chores. They fed the animals, checked the water troughs, and tended to Patch with growing familiarity. Their training rides started small, just enough to build the horse's strength without wearing him down. Eli kept Miss Shaw's pocket watch close, timing their progress with cautious attention. Morning and evening, they'd guide Patch through short loops around the property, never pushing too hard. Between rides, Eli returned to the endless task of mending fences, while Clara kept detailed notes in her careful schoolgirl hand. On the 3rd afternoon, the weather turned. Eli noticed the change while they were 4 miles out on their longest ride, yet dark clouds mounted above the Mogollon rim like a wall of purple-black cotton. Moving fast. Clara pointed upward, worry crossing her young face. Pa, those look mean. Eli studied the thunderheads, piling higher by the minute. The wind picked up, carrying the sharp scent of rain. He remembered Ben Nez's words about reading weather signs, about seeking higher ground when storms rolled in. We'd best head for the ridge, he said, turning Patch toward elevated terrain. But the horse had other ideas. Patch planted his hooves, ears swiveling toward a low swale to their left. He pawed at the hardpan earth, snorting softly. Something's got into him, Clara said, gripping the saddle horn as rain began to slash down in heavy sheets. Eli squinted through the downpour. Ben's other words came back to him about trusting animals' instincts for water. Against his better judgment, he loosened the reins. All right, boy. Show us what you're about. Patch moved with purpose toward the depression, his uneven gait steady despite the mud forming beneath his hooves. At the bottom of the swale, he stopped and began nosing aside the brittle surface crust. Beneath it, water seeped up dark and clean. A hidden spring. Well, I'll be, Eli breathed. He helped Claire down, and they let Patch drink his fill before cupping their own hands to taste the sweet water. The rain fell harder. Driven sideways by gusting wind, lightning split the sky, followed by thunder that shook the ground. Eli spotted a gnarled juniper nearby and led them to its shelter. They huddled close, Clara between him and Patch, watching sheets of rain transform the desert. The Lord provides, Clara whispered, patting Patch's wet shoulder. The horse stood steady, Protecting them from the worst of the wind with his broad frame, they waited out the storms, fury beneath the juniper's twisted branches. As the thunder grew more distant and the rain softened to a steady patter, Eli saw movement on the road below. A lone rider approached through the gloom. Leading a pack mule loaded with surveying equipment, the rider tipped his hat as he drew near. It was Thomas Ridge, the half-Cherokee surveyor known for his precise work and quiet manner. His usual neat appearance was dampened by the weather, but his eyes were sharp as ever. "Afternoon, Branson family," Ridge called over the rain. "Caught you out in it too, I see." "That it did," Eli answered. "Your work doesn't stop for weather?" Ridge's expression darkened slightly. "Can't afford to, with Mallory pushing so hard. He's got his men measuring parcels rough and fast cutting corners where they think folks won't notice." He adjusted his slicker, water streaming off the oiled canvas. "You'll want to watch your boundary markers, especially near the proposed rail line." Eli nodded, understanding the warning in Ridge's words. The railroad man's rush survey could cost ranchers like him precious acreage. Much obliged for the heads up, they bid Ridge farewell and started the slow journey home once. The rain slackened enough for safe travel. The desert had transformed. Dry washes now ran brown with floodwater, and new streams cut across their usual path. Patch picked his way carefully through the mud, seeming to know which ground would hold their weight. The sun was setting by the time they reached the ranch house. Its weather-beaten walls glowed warm in the last light, lamplight already burning in the kitchen window. They took time to dry Patch thoroughly, checking his hooves for packed mud and rubbing him down with clean straw until his coat was merely damp instead of dripping. Inside, Clara changed into her dry nightdress while Eli laid their boots by the stove to dry. The rain drummed steadily on the roof as they spread their map on the kitchen table, marking out tomorrow's planned route with careful pencil strokes. They would need to ride longer distances soon if Patch was to be ready for the endurance race. "We'll carry a canteen from now on," Eli said, making a note in the margin. "No matter how short the ride seems." Clara nodded, stifling a yawn. Patch knew where to find water today. Pa, just like Mr. Nez said animals sometimes can. Bet he did. Eli stood and walked to the window, looking out at the barn where Patch was settled in his stall. "Thank you, old boy," he said softly, meaning it with all his heart. They banked the stove for the night and headed to their beds, the steady rhythm of rain their lullaby. In the barn, Patch stood quiet in his stall, steam rising gently from his back in the cool air. Outside, the storm continued its slow march across the desert, watering the thirsty land as darkness settled over the ranch. A week passed like wind through prairie grass. Miss Edith Shaw's neat handwriting filled the slate board outside the Silver Creek schoolhouse, drawing a crowd of townsfolk who muttered and nodded over the endurance ride rules. Clara stood on tiptoe, copying each word carefully into her notebook while Eli read aloud. 20 miles total distance, he recited, his weathered finger tracking the chalk marks. 3 checkpoints. All riders must maintain a humane pace. He paused at the last line. Any horse showing signs of distress will be immediately disqualified. Miss Shaw stepped out onto the schoolhouse steps, smoothing her apron. "We want this to be a proper test of endurance, not just speed," she explained, her voice carrying across the gathered crowd. "The purse goes to the horse and rider who finish strong, not just first." Clara clutched her father's sleeve. "That's good for Patch, ain't it? He's steady, even if he's not the fastest." "Reckon so," Eli agreed quietly. He studied the route map posted beside the rules, noting the checkpoint locations. The course formed a rough circle around Silver Creek, crossing varied terrain that would test both horse and rider. The next 2 days flew past in careful preparation. Eli and Clara worked together in the barn, their hands gentle as they checked every piece of tack. The old leather soaked up Neat's foot oil like parched earth, drinking rain. Clara polished the brass bits until they gleamed, while Eli tested each buckle and strap. "Don't want anything failing 20 miles. Out," he told Clara, as he replaced a worn leather tie with fresh rawhide. Patch stood patient in his stall, occasionally reaching over to lip at Clara's hair, making her giggle. They kept Patch's work light those days, just enough movement to keep his muscles loose. The horse seemed to sense something important approached. He carried himself with careful attention, picking his feet up higher than usual during their short morning walks. Saturday dawned clear and cool, with promise of heat to come. Reverend Abel Garnery gathered the riders near the starting line, his Bible open in his weathered hands. 14 competitors sat mounted, some shifting restlessly in their saddles, while others stood quiet. Patch remained still beneath Eli, head low but ears forward. Lord, the Reverend's voice carried across the morning air. Watch over these riders and their mounts. Guide them with wisdom and mercy through the miles ahead. His eyes met each rider's in turn. Remember, friends, how we compete speaks louder than where we finish. Clara stood with Miss Shaw near the starting banner, her face bright with excitement. Good luck, Pa, she called as the riders lined up. Eli touched his hat brim in response, his throat too tight for words at the signal. They were off. As expected, several young riders on quick ponies shot ahead, kicking up dust in their eagerness. Eli held Patch to an easy trot, feeling the horse's steady rhythm beneath him. The morning sun stretched their shadow long across the trail as they settled into pace. Easy now, he murmured, though Patch showed no sign of wanting to chase the leaders. We were at 20 miles ahead. They were approaching the halfway point to checkpoint 1 when trouble struck one of the early leaders. A bay horse stumbled, sides heaving, mouth working desperately around a dry bit. Its young rider tried to urge it forward, but the horse planted its feet. Clearly in distress, Patch's ears pricked forward. Without prompting, he angled off the main trail, heading into a thick stand of mesquite. Eli started to correct him, then remembered the horse's uncanny sense for water. Sure enough, tucked into the shade of the thorny trees lay a natural depression filled with recent rainwater. The bay's rider noticed their detour and followed. Soon several other competitors joined them, letting their mounts drink in careful sips. Hats were tipped in Eli's direction as the horses recovered their strength. Much obliged, one rider said quietly. My mare was starting to lag. Eli just nodded, keeping count of Patch's drinks. The horse seemed to know exactly how much he needed, lifting his head after a few swallows to look down the trail. They moved on at the same steady pace, neither gaining nor losing ground. Checkpoint 1 came and went, with volunteers marking their passage. Patch's rhythm never faltered as they pressed on toward the second marker. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning cool. More riders began to struggle with the distance dot at checkpoint 2. A telegraph operator sat at a portable desk, noting down times as riders passed. His pencil scratched across the paper as Eli and Patch trotted through. They were solidly mid-pack, several riders ahead and behind. The operator gave them a nod as he recorded their number. Holding steady, he commented. Most ahead of you are starting to fade. The third leg proved the greatest challenge. The trail led across a rocky basin where heat rose in visible waves from the stone. Sweat darkened Patch's neck, but his breathing remained deep and even. Twice more he deviated from the marked path, leading them to hidden seeps where water trickled between rocks. Each time, Eli allowed the detour. Time lost here means strength saved later, he reminded himself, remembering Miss Shaw's words about finishing strong. Other riders followed their example, the competition giving way to trail wisdom as the miles wore on. The sun had passed its peak when they finally crested the last ridge. Silver Creek lay below them, its scattered buildings looking like children's toys from this height. Bright banners marked the finish line, and Eli could see a crowd gathering to welcome the riders home. Patch's ears perked forward at the sight, but he maintained his steady pace down the slope. His steps remained sure, neither hurrying nor lagging. Despite the distance covered, he moved with the same careful attention he'd shown at the start. Clara's voice carried up to them on the wind, and Eli felt his heart lift. 20 miles behind them, and Patch was still going strong. Whatever the outcome, they'd proven what a supposedly worthless horse could do with a little faith and fair treatment. The finishing banners drew closer with each stride. Patch's hooves kicked up small puffs of dust, marking their progress toward home one step at a time. The sound of the waiting crowd grew clearer, Voices calling encouragement, children shouting, and through it all, Clara's clear voice leading the way. The late afternoon sun painted Silver Creek in shades of gold and amber as the endurance riders made their final descent. Dust clouds marked their progress, spreading like thin veils across the autumn sky. Eli kept his seat steady, one hand resting light on the reins as Patch maintained his measured pace. Ahead, a bay horse stumbled, its coat dark with sweat and its rider wrestling to keep control. "Easy there, brother," Eli called out as Patch carried him past the struggling pair. The other rider merely nodded, his face etched with worry as he pulled his mount to a walk. The creek crossing lay just ahead, water glinting in the slanting light. Other horses plunged in desperately, but Patch approached with the same deliberate care he'd shown all day. He lowered his head to drink, taking only what he needed before lifting his muzzle. Without any signal from Eli, he stepped forward, each hoof placement sure and steady on the slick rocks. "That's it, old friend," Eli murmured, patting the horse's damp neck. "Slow and steady wins the race," just like Clara's been saying. As they rounded the last bend toward Main Street, a familiar voice rang out. "Pa, Patch." Clara darted from between the spectators lining the street, her braids flying as she fell into step beside them. Just as they practiced in their daily training, she began counting Patch's breaths aloud. "1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3," she called, matching her stride to the horse's rhythm. "His breathing's good, Pa. Just like at home." Eli couldn't help but smile at her enthusiasm, even as he focused on guiding Patch toward the finish line. The horse's ears remained pricked forward, his gait as steady as a pendulum despite the 20 miles behind them. They crossed beneath the banner strung between the general store and the telegraph office. Moving with the same measured pace they'd maintained all day, Miss Shaw stepped forward from the judge's table, her clipboard clutched tight. "Hold for inspection," she called out, her voice carrying clear authority despite its gentleness. Two veterinarians approached, their hands moving efficiently over Patch's body. They checked his gums, peered into his eyes, and felt along his legs. Eli held his breath, but Patch stood quietly, barely showing signs of the long journey. "Clean bill of health," announced the senior vet, straightening up with an expression of surprise. "Best condition I've seen today. Truth be told, Miss Shaw consulted her records, comparing times and conditions." A crowd gathered, their whispers growing as she checked and rechecked her figures. Finally, she looked up, a broad smile breaking across her face. "First place," she declared, to Eli Branson and Patch on combined score of time and condition. Victory by wisdom rather than speed alone. A moment of stunned silence fell over the gathering, broken by Miss Shaw's cheerful applause. Reverend Garner stepped forward, his weathered face beaming. "The Lord's grace shows itself in mysterious ways," he said, clasping Eli's hand. "Well done, brother." "Well done indeed." Clara threw her arms around Patch's neck, burying her face in his mane. "You did it, Patch. You really did it." Her voice caught with happy tears, and the horse lowered his head to curl it protectively around her small frame. The town treasurer approached, carrying a small leather pouch that clinked promisingly. $50 in gold, Mr. Branson, as advertised. He pressed it into Eli's palm. The weight of it feeling almost unreal after so many months of scraping by, Eli didn't waste any time. Still mounted, he led Patch directly to the general store, where he purchased 100 pounds of flour and 3 boxes of fence staples. The remaining coins he tucked carefully into his shirt pocket, close against his heart dot as the sun painted the western sky in deep oranges and purples. The Branson ranch house glowed with more warmth than it had seen in months. Neighbors gathered around the worn kitchen table, their presence filling the small space with conversation and laughter. Dora Pike arrived with a fresh-baked apple pie, its crust still warm from her oven. "Least I could do," she said, setting it on the table. "After how you and that remarkable horse helped find my calves. Who'd have thought he had such gifts in him?" Ben Nez appeared in the doorway, his dark eyes twinkling with satisfaction as he took in the scene. He'd returned just in time for the celebration, carrying a small package wrapped in clean cloth For the horse, he explained, revealing a bundle of sweet grass and herbs. To honor a wise spirit. Clara helped her father serve coffee in their mismatched cups while the oil lamps cast friendly shadows on the walls. Patch's occasional soft nickering drifted in from the stable. Mixing with the sounds of contentment and community that filled the house, Eli sat back in his chair, watching his daughter move among their guests with a lightness he hadn't before her mother passed. Tomorrow, he would ride into town first thing to register their improvements with Mrs. Wilcox at the recorder's office. But tonight was for celebrating not just a victory, but the restoration of hope itself. Much obliged, he said quietly, catching Ben's eye across the table. For everything, the Navajo blacksmith nodded, understanding passing between them. The old ones say that sometimes the greatest strength lies in the gentlest heart, he replied. Your patch proves their wisdom. Through the window, the last light of day painted the land in soft purple shadows. Inside the ranch house, lamps glowed golden against the gathering dark, illuminating faces that just weeks ago had been strangers, now drawn together by the unexpected. Grace of a horse no one had wanted in the steadfast faith of those who had seen his worth. The morning sun had barely cleared the hills when Eli and Clara set out for town in their weathered buckboard. Clara held the fair certificate carefully in her lap, smoothing its edges with pride. The prize purse, $50 in fresh minted gold, sat wrapped in a clean handkerchief beneath the wagon seat. Eli's worn leather portfolio contained every receipt he'd saved over the years, documenting improvements to their modest spread. Remember what we practiced, Pa? Clara asked, her voice bright with hope. About the new fence posts and the water rights? Eli nodded, managing a thin smile. Got it all straight in my head, darling. The wagon wheels creaked as they rolled past the church, where Reverend Garner stood, sweeping the steps. He raised his hand in blessing as they passed. The county recorder's office occupied the ground floor of a red brick building, its windows gleaming in the morning light. Mrs. Hattie Wilcox sat at her broad oak desk, wire-rimmed spectacles perched on her nose as she sorted through the day's documents. The brass clock on her wall ticked steadily, marking each precious moment. Good morning, Mrs. Wilcox, Eli said, removing his hat. Clara mimicked the gesture with her own small bonnet. Mr. Branson. Hattie's expression remained neutral, but her eyes held a trace of warmth. I understand you're here to file productivity proof. Yes, ma'am. Eli began laying out his documents with careful precision. Got the fair certificate showing our win in the endurance ride. Plus receipts for improvements, new fencing, well maintenance, livestock purchases. Hattie examined each paper methodically, making small notes in her leather-bound ledger. The scratch of her pen filled the quiet room. Clara stood on tiptoe, trying to see over the desk's edge. The office door burst open with a bang that made them all jump. Pike Mallory strode in, his boots leaving muddy prints on the polished floor. A folded document protruded from his vest pocket like a weapon. Mighty sorry to interrupt, Mallory drawled, though his face showed no trace of apology. But I've got some business that can't wait. He pulled out the document with a flourish. Seems there's been a misunderstanding about the Branson parcel. Eli's spine stiffened. What kind of misunderstanding? According to this deed, Mallory said, spreading the paper across Hattie's desk. That land was sold to Western Development Corporation 10 years ago. For railroad benefit, naturally. His smile didn't reach his eyes. You've been squatting, Mr. Branson. That's not possible, Eli protested, his voice rough. My father worked that land. I've got the original deed right here. He fumbled in his portfolio, hands trembling slightly. Sheriff Clegg appeared in the doorway, drawn by the raised voices. His weathered face creased with concern as he took in the scene. Hattie adjusted her spectacles and bent over Mallory's deed. The official seal caught in the morning light, but something made her frown. She traced the edge of the stamped impression with one careful finger. The ink bleeds oddly here, she murmured, more to herself than the others. And the paper grain ... She straightened, her voice growing firmer. This requires closer examination. I'm setting a hearing for 3 days from now, 9 o'clock sharp. Mallory's face darkened for an instant before smoothing into practiced calm. As you wish, Mrs. Wilcox. But in the meantime, ... He produced another document from his coat. A temporary eviction order, effective pending the hearing's outcome. Can't have unauthorized persons interfering with potential railway operations. The room seemed to grow colder despite the morning sun streaming through the windows. Clara pressed closer to her father's side, her small hand finding his. "I'll post the hearing notice straight away," Hattie said, already reaching for her official forms. Her crisp movements carried an undertone of determination that made Mallory's smile falter slightly. "Sheriff," Clegg cleared his throat. "Let's all keep calm here. 3 days ain't long to wait for proper justice." Outside the brick building, townsfolk gathered in small clusters, voices low but carrying. Eli caught fragments as he helped Clara back into the wagon. Juan. "The fair price yesterday ... double quotes. But now they're saying he's got no right to the land ... Railroad's getting mighty. Bold ... double quotes. Shame about the Bransons." Whispers followed them down the street like autumn leaves. Yesterday's victory crumbling into today's uncertainty. They took the long road home, neither speaking as the sun climbed toward noon. Patch nickered a greeting from his paddock as they pulled up to the ranch house. But even his friendly welcome couldn't lift the heavy silence. That evening, Clara ladled din bean stew into their chipped bowls. The kitchen felt smaller than usual, as if the walls were pressing in. She crossed to the fireplace and carefully placed the prize purse on the wooden mantel. "For courage," she said softly, her young voice steady despite the tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. Eli bowed his head, his prayer voice shaking but determined. "Lord, we need your guidance now more than ever. Show us the path through this valley of shadows." He looked up at his daughter, managing a weak smile. "First thing tomorrow, we'll ride to see Reverend Garner. Maybe he'll know of an honest surveyor who can help us prove our claim." Clara nodded, straightening her shoulders. "We won't give up, Pa. The Lord doesn't give us trials without also giving us strength." The lamp flickered, casting long shadows on the wall. Outside, a coyote called mournfully across the darkening their land. Eli thought fiercely, no matter what that forged deed might say. They'd fight for it with truth and prayer as their weapons. But as he watched Clara carefully washing their supper dishes, his heart ached with the weight of uncertainty in his stall. Patch stamped once, then quieted, as if lending his own steady presence to their troubled evening. The horse that nobody wanted, who had proved his worth against all odds, now stood as a silent witness to their determination to overcome this new challenge. Eli pulled his worn Bible from the shelf, finding comfort in its familiar weight. "Time for evening scripture, Clara," he said, his voice growing stronger. They would face tomorrow together, with faith to light their way through whatever darkness lay ahead. The sound of his reading filled their small home, while outside the stars began to appear one by one above their threatened homestead. 3 days until the hearing. 3 days to gather proof and allies against Mallory's schemes. 3 days to pray for justice to prevail. First light painted the eastern sky in hushed strokes of pink and gold as Eli and Clara hitched up their tired buckboard. The wooden wheels creaked a familiar song against the packed earth of their yard. Clara wrapped her mother's old shawl tighter against the morning chill, while Eli checked the harness straps one final time. "The Lord provides a path," Eli murmured, helping Clara onto the worn leather seat. The words felt thin in the cool air, but he clung to them like a lifeline. They found Reverend Garner already awake, tending his small vegetable patch behind the weathered parsonage. He straightened slowly at their approach, brushing soil from his hands. The old preacher's eyes held steady concern as Eli explained about Mallory's deed and the eviction. "Threat. The truth fears no examination," Reverend Garner said, leading them inside. His small kitchen smelled of coffee and worn leather-bound books. "Thomas Ridge knows every inch of this county's boundaries. If anyone can help untangle this mess, he will." They found Thomas in his office near the livery stable, a narrow room lined with rolled maps and survey equipment. Morning light filtered through dusty windows, catching the neat rows of brass instruments on his desk. He listened intently as Eli described Mallory's claim, his dark eyes thoughtful. "Let me see what we have here," Thomas said, pulling several large plats from their cubbyholes. He spread the maps across his work table, weighing the corners with polished stones. His finger traced the survey lines with practiced precision. "Here's the problem," he said finally. "Mallory's overlay doesn't match the original military survey markers. See these boundary lines?" He pointed to several intersections. "They're offset by nearly 50 yards in places. That's not natural error. That's deliberate adjustment." Clara leaned in close, her brow furrowed in concentration. "What does that mean, Mr. Ridge?" "It means someone's been redrawing history," Thomas replied, his voice grave but kind. "And there's something else you should know about your land. Mr. Branson, your south line sits on a faulted shelf, the kind of formation that often holds water." Eli's hands tightened on his hat brim. "Water?" Thomas nodded. "A proven water source would make your land indisputably productive by any measure. If you can find one, especially a named source that shows up in older surveys, that would anchor your claim." "Solid." He straightened, meeting Eli's eyes. "I'll testify about these discrepancies. But physical evidence of water would be even better." Their next stop was the county recorder's office, where Hattie Wilcox sat ramrod straight at her desk, steel-rimmed glasses catching the morning light. She examined Thomas's findings with sharp attention. "I can compare this Elon. Mallory's deed against my registry matrix first thing tomorrow," she said, her tone crisp but encouraging. "Every notary ring leaves its own unique pattern. If this seal's mismatched, we'll know." She pulled out a heavy ledger, its pages filled with her precise handwriting. "The law may move slow, Mr. Branson, but it moves sure. We'll get to the truth of this." By then, the morning had stretched toward noon. Eli bought 2 fresh rolls and a wedge of cheese from the bakery, a simple lunch to share with Clara on their long drive home. They ate in companionable silence, the buckboard swaying beneath them like a ship on gentle waves. The afternoon passed in the comfort of routine. Checking fence lines, feeding stock, the familiar rhythm of necessary work keeping darker thoughts at bay. Clara curried Patch with extra care, humming hymns under her breath. The horse stood patient under her attention, occasionally turning his head to nose her pockets for treats. After a simple supper of beans and cornbread, Eli stepped out to check on Patch one final time. Heavy clouds had rolled in, blotting out the moon and stars. The air felt thick with coming rain. He found Patch pacing the fence line, ears pricked forward, steps quick and uncertain. The horse's usual calm demeanor had shifted to restless energy. Eli watched him for several long moments, remembering how the animal had led them to water during the endurance ride. "Easy there." "Old friend," Eli murmured, wetting a burlap cloth at the pump. He draped it over Patch's neck, soothing the agitated horse with gentle strokes. "We'll ride at first light tomorrow. See what we can find along that south boundary." Patch stilled under his touch, but his ears remained forward, as if listening to something far away. Eli patted his shoulder one last time before heading in for the night dot inside. Clara had already laid out their clothes for morning and set their alarm clock. She sat at the kitchen table, carefully copying Thomas Ridgey's map notes into her own small notebook. "We'll find what we need." "Pa," she said without looking up. "The Lord doesn't give us trials without providing answers." Eli smiled despite his worry. His daughter's faith, like her mother's before her, ran deep and true as an underground spring. Perhaps that's what they needed most right now, the courage to keep looking until they found the way through. He checked the stove one final time, banking the coals for morning, then joined Clara in their evening prayers. Outside, a cool wind rustled through the cottonwoods, carrying the promise of rain. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, they had a plan and all eyes in their corner. Sometimes, Eli reflected, that was miracle enough. Patch's snort pierced the pre-dawn stillness. The horse stood rigid by the south fence line, his front hoof striking the hard-packed earth with purpose. Eli and Clara hurried from the barn, tools in hand. The eastern sky had barely begun to brighten, painting everything in soft shades of gray. "Easy now," Eli murmured, watching Patch nose around a scatter of white flint stones. The horse's ears pricked forward, and he stamped again. More insistent this time, Clara gripped her small pick while Eli positioned his shovel. "Right here, Pa," she whispered, not wanting to break the morning's hush. Eli nodded and began to dig. The soil, though hard at first, soon gave way to darker earth. A cool mineral scent rose from the ground, making Patch's nostrils flare. Then Eli's shovel struck something different, not rock, but wet soil that seemed to pulse beneath the blade. "Look." Clara pointed as a thin ribbon of water threaded up through the loosened dirt. Suddenly, it burst forth, clear and sweet, creating a small pool in the fresh-dug hole. They worked quickly in the strengthening dawnlight. Eli gathered flat stones to line the spring's edges, while Clara fashioned a small cross from 2 willow branches, setting it at the head of their newfound blessing. By mid-morning, they had constructed a rough box around the spring. Protecting it from debris and cattle, Eli pulled a plank from their meager lumber pile and, with careful strokes of his pocket knife, carved Branson Spring into the wood. They sat right there on the damp ground, sharing a simple meal of dry bread and jerky, watching the spring's steady flow with wonder in their hearts. "We'd best file the claim straight away," Eli said, brushing crumbs from his shirt. They hitched up the buckboard, though every part of them wanted to stay and guard their precious discovery. The rutted road demanded a careful pace, each bump and dip a test of patience. Patch followed them to the fence line, standing alert as if keeping watch over their newfound treasure. Once satisfied, he dropped his head to graze, calm returning to his stance. The sun was setting by the time they reached town, their clothes dusty from the long ride. They found Hattie Wilcox in her office, already reaching to douse the oil lamps. She paused at their urgent knock, one hand on the lamp's brass key. Hattie Wilcox paused in her lamp-dousing routine, studying their earnest faces. With a small nod, she struck a match and relit the brass lamp on her desk, its warm glow pushing back the gathering shadows. "Let's see what you've brought," she said, adjusting her spectacles as Eli spread out the water claim documents. The scratch of her pen filled the quiet office as she witnessed their affidavit, gating it with precise, dark strokes. Her hand was steady, each letter carved with the weight of legal authority. The door's bell chimed again as Thomas Ridge entered, carrying a leather-bound ledger and a brass magnifying lens. Without a word, he laid Mallory's deed beside known exemplars from Hattie's registry. The lamp cast strong light across the documents as they bent to examine them. "Here," Thomas said, adjusting the lens over the seals. "Every authentic impression from this notary ring shows a hairline nick at the crown. But look at Mallory's, smooth as new penny." His finger traced the telltale spot. Reverend Garner arrived next, the church's battered minute book tucked under his arm. He opened to pages yellow with age, showing years of Branson tithe records and board minutes, noting Eli's consistent presence. 10 years of faithful attendance and contribution, the Reverend said quietly. "That's not the mark of a man who sold his land." The office door burst open, bell clanging sharply. Pike Mallory filled the doorframe, face flushed with anger. "This office is closed," he snapped. "Whatever game you're playing can wait until—" "No game, Mr. Mallory," Sheriff Clegg interrupted, appearing behind him. The lawman's calm presence seemed to fill the space, cooling tempers. "Just citizens conducting legal business." Hattie rose from her desk, spine straight as a fence post. "The hearing will convene tomorrow at 12 o'clock noon, she announced. "I'll secure these documents in the registry safe until then." Her tone left no room for argument. Later, at the boarding house, Eli and Clara sat before bowls of beef stew and day-old rolls. Neither could eat much, their minds too full of tomorrow's hearing. They borrowed a small room upstairs, knelt together for prayers, then lay awake listening to the town settle for the night. Morning came clear and bright, sunlight streaming through worn curtains. The market bells rang out across Silver Creek, marking the start of what promised to be a momentous day. The church hall buzzed with whispers as townsfolk squeezed into rough-hewn pews. By noon, every bench held neighbors shoulder to shoulder, their faces serious beneath Sunday hats. Hattie Wilcox sat at a table before the altar rail, her spine straight as a fence post, registry books stacked neat beside her. Pike Mallory strode forward first, waving his deed with theatrical flourish. "This document grants clear title to the Silver and Pacific Railroad," he declared, voice filling the rafters. "Progress cannot be stopped by sentiment." Thomas Ridge rose next, spreading his survey maps with careful precision. His quiet voice carried authority as he traced the mismatched boundary lines. "Furthermore," he added, holding up Mallory's deed beneath a magnifying glass, "every authentic notary seal since 1863 shows this distinctive nick. This deed seal is smooth, a forgery." Reverend Garner testified to 8 years of Eli's consistent presence, reading from church records in measured tones. Miss Shaw followed, detailing how the endurance race purse went straight to ranch improvements, her schoolteacher's precision lending weight to each word. When Sheriff Clegg nodded permission for Clara to speak, she stood straight back before the crowd. "Patch found water twice," she said clearly. "Once in the storm that might have caught us, and again at our south fence where Branson Spring flows now. He sees what others miss, just like Papa taught me to." Hattie's ruling cut through remaining whispers. "The railroad's deed is declared invalid by reason of forgery. L.A. Branson's title stands firm, with Branson Spring now recorded in the county water roll as afternoon sun slanted through windows. A different railroad man, gray-haired and thoughtful, approached Eli. "Your spring could water our locomotives," he offered. "We'll pay fair rates and build the tank ourselves," Eli considered carefully. "Sundays kept quiet," he said. "Fair rates for neighbors too, and a bond held against damage." They drafted terms by lamplight, Hattie witnessing each page. When hands were shaken, the agreement promised steady income from what once seemed worthless. That evening, the Branson barn stood peaceful under purple thunderheads rolling harmlessly eastward. Patch crunched his well-earned oats, his gentle presence a reminder of how grace arrives in unexpected forms. 2 weeks passed like water flowing steadily downstream. Each sunrise brought Eli and Clara to new tasks, mending the last stretches of fence, checking their small herd for signs of illness, and finally signing their names to the thick stack of lease papers in Mrs. Wilcox's office. The railroad tank rose beside Branson Spring, its metal sides gleaming in the morning light. True to the agreement, the pump stood quiet on Sundays, honoring the Lord's Day. The first locomotive pulled up on a Wednesday morning, its black iron bulk wheezing to a stop. Steam hissed as water flowed into its thirsty belly. Eli tucked the modest fee into his pocket, knowing it meant beans for the pot and seed for next season's planting. His heart felt full, watching Clara carefully chalk a sign on their gate. "Widows and Orphans Supper every Friday." That first Friday evening, the ranch kitchen glowed with more warmth than they had known since Sarah passed. Reverend Garner helped arrange the benches while Miss Shaw organized the serving line with schoolroom precision. Dora arrived with 3 fresh-baked pies tucked in her wagon, their sweet scent mixing with the savory stew bubbling on the stove. Ben Nez set up his tools on the porch, fitting new shoes on tired horses without taking a penny. Thomas Ridge spread his maps across the old table, showing the women how small irrigation ditches could turn their kitchen. Gardens green even in the dry season dot as the sun painted the hills gold. Hattie Wilcox rode up in her buggy. She carried official copies of their recorded claim, each one tied neat with blue ribbon. "For safekeeping," she said, pressing them into Eli's weathered hands. The evening deepened into purple dusk. Eli stood by the corral, one hand resting on Patch's warm neck. "Time for grace," he called, and the gathered neighbors bowed their heads. "Lord," he began, his voice rough with feeling, "I have to admit something true. I thought I was saving a useless horse that day. Turns out he saved us, and more than us." Koch shifted gently beneath his touch as voices murmured, "Amen," above them. Stars salted the dark sky like diamond dust. The spring's steady music played beneath the crickets' evening hymn. Hope felt as real as the water flowing beneath their feet, as true as the light spilling from their windows onto the blessed earth. They could now, without doubt, call home Dot if today's story reminded you of the quiet strength of love. I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow we'll meet right here, where love speaks softly and stays.